Okay, guys, we're going to look at some solving by factoring here in section 7 of chapter 4. Uh, and you might wonder, we went through all this factoring stuff. Why do we do this? Well, because solving equations by factoring is a technique to solve quadratic equations. Uh, Second semester, you'll do a couple of other different ways to solve by other quadratic equations. But for right now, we're just going to do these solving by factoring, and it's definitely something we have to do when we get to the conic sections also, is to do some factoring and even some solving by factoring. So it's got some pretty uh, step-by-step processes here if you want to look at it this way. The first step is to get the equation set equal to zero. Okay, and a lot of times that's already done for you. And you look at this first one, and it's already done. And as I go through these steps, I'll work with this first one here. And then the second step, guys, is to factor the non-zero side. So we're going to look at this non-zero side here, and we're going to factor it. So I see three terms. I don't see a greatest common factor, and it is three terms, so that's going to make me think of reverse FOIL. Okay, so I'm going to make my two parentheses. First term's got to be x and x, right? Last term's got to multiply to be negative 30, add to be this 1 here, right? Positive 1. So to me, I think that's a positive 6 and a negative 5, right? Those multiply to be negative 30, but add to be 1. Uh, and it's still equal to 0 out here. So the third step is to set your factors equal to 0 and solve. Which is your final step. And here are my two factors, x plus 6 and x minus 5. So I'm going to take both of these factors, guys, and I'm going to set them equal to 0. And I'm going to solve these. Now you might ask, why do you set these equal to 0? Well, because look, I've got two things, x plus 6 and x minus 5. When I multiply them, I have to get a 0. So the truth is, mathematically, one of these has to be 0, if not both of them. 7 times 0, 0 times 4, 0 times 0. Those are the combinations that would give me a 0. Now, they don't have to be those specific numbers, but both of those factors, when I multiply them, they have to be 0. So one of them's got to be 0, if not both of them. And that's why this is an OR problem, and this will come up in the last part of this chapter on whether they're those and OR problems, conjunctions and disjunctions we did in chapter 2. We'll come back to that a little bit, but for equations, it's always an OR. So we're going to just do a little bit of solving here. So we get x equal negative 6, add 5 here, so we get x equal 5. And if I put negative 6 in here, that would be negative 6 plus 6, which would give me a 0. I don't even care what that is. It's got to be a 0. If I put a 5 in here, 5 minus 5 is 0. Doesn't matter what this is, your answer is going to be 0. So there are your solutions, x equal negative 6 or x equal 5. So let's do the same thing here with the second equation. Notice this one's got to be set equal to 0. Now, something I think that will help you. I always look for my largest degree term, and I always like this to be positive. So as tempting as it is to just move this over here to this side to get it set equal to 0, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to move the 6a over, and I'm going to move the 40 over. And I know that's a little bit more work, but believe me, in the long run, it's going to be easier, because if that first term, as far as degree, is negative, it makes it much more difficult to factor. So there's step one. And like I said, I always like this first term, the largest degree term, to always be positive, something that will help you out as you go to factor. So as I factor here, guys, ooh, I see a common factor of 2. So I'm going to factor that out. So it's 2a squared minus 3a minus 20. And truthfully, you wouldn't necessarily have to do that, but you probably should, because once again, it's going to make this factoring, and this is kind of an ugly factor because it's got to be 2a and a. And then I need to think of two things that multiply to be negative 20 go in here. But when I do my O and my I got to come up with that negative 3. So, like I said, let's just try some things. I'm going to do let's do a plus 5 and a minus 4. That's a negative 20, right? Let me see. 2a times 4 is a negative 8a. And then 5 times a is a plus 5a. Oh, gosh. I got it on the first try. So negative 3a, which is what we want here. So don't forget this 2 out front, guys. Okay, don't forget that 2 out here. That's definitely something important that we need to think about. So the third step, once I have this factored, which I do, is set all these factors. And you do have 3 factors here. Set them equal to 0. Now here's the first thing. Can 2 equal 0? No, it cannot. So you don't have to worry about that common factor. You might say, do I always not have to worry about that common factor? Well, no, that's not the case. We're going to see one here in a second where you do have to worry about that common factor. So then I'm going to set the 2a plus 5 equal to 0, or the a minus 4 equal to 0. And I'm going to solve both of these. This one's a little bit uglier of an answer. And guys, you will definitely have some that are going to be what you might call ugly answers, but that's just because they're fractions. So we get a equals negative 5 halves here. Add 4, this one's a little bit easier. So we get a equals 4 here. So your solution is a equals negative 5 halves, or a equals 4. And really, if you would go back in and substitute those in there, you should find the same answer. I could do it. I could do it with 4 here, because 4 squared is 16 times 4, which is 64. Let's see, 6 times 4 is 24 plus 40. So yeah, I get 64 equals 64. So I checked it with 4. I could do it with negative 5 halves, but just believe me, it would make you come out to an equation that is true. So let's look at this next one here. Same thing. I got this larger term here. I like for it to be positive. So I'm going to move the 14y over here. So I get 2y squared minus 14y equals 0. Now I'm going to factor this side. Well, gosh, I see a common factor of 2y. And then I'd be left with y minus 7 equals 0. Gosh, guys, can I factor the y minus 7 any? Nope. So I'm really done factoring here. So now I'm going to set my factors equal to 0. Now in this case, this greatest common factor can be equal to 0. And it can be equal to 0 because it has a variable here. I'm going to divide by 2. 0 divided by 2 is 0. And then add 7 here. I get y equals 7. So there you go. Y equals 0, y equals 7. Would be your two solutions to this. Let's look at a couple more here. And really, the second one's the one I really want to do more than any. This is set equal to 0 already. Let's go ahead and factor out a common factor. In this case, is just a b. So I'm left with b times 3b plus 4. I can't factor that anymore, so that's b equals 0. That's a real easy one here. There's nothing to solve on this one. Or 3b plus 4 equals 0. Subtract 4. 3b equals negative 4. Divide by 3. So b equals negative 4/3 here. And this would be your two solutions. B equals 0 or b equals negative 4/3. Okay, this last one's definitely one that I want to do. This one's a little redundant on the one I just did. But for this one, once again, highest term, I want it to be positive, so I'm going to subtract 1. So you get 4c squared minus 1 equals 0. You look at that and say, gosh, do I have a common factor? No. Do I have a trinomial? No. Well, for two terms, we got to look, is it difference of squares or maybe even the sum or difference of cubes? Well, this is the difference of squares. Notice those are both perfect squares. So it's what do I square to get the first term? 2c. That's both my first terms. What do I square to get 1? It's 1. One's a plus, one's a minus. So there's how I factor this. This is the difference of squares. Now I go ahead and I'm going to take both of these products and I'm going to set them equal to 0 and solve. So subtract 1 here. I get 2c equals negative 1. Divide by 2. I get c equals negative 1/2. I'm going to add 1 here. I get 2c equals 1. Divide by 2. I get c equals 1/2. So c equals negative 1/2 or c equals 1/2 here. I'm going to tell you, the great thing about really what you're going to do with these is, guys, you should really only see three types of factoring. Greatest common factor, which we saw up here. You're going to see your trinomial factoring, which is reverse FOIL, okay, which is what we did on the first page, if I can spell here. And then you're going to see difference of squares. Guys, you're not going to see grouping, which I know a lot of you do well in factor by grouping, and you're not going to see sum or difference of cubes, that long formula. So that should make the factoring go a little bit easier. Okay, guys, so your assignment for today is on page 197. I want you to do 7 through 28 all, and that's on the written exercises. So for tomorrow, there will be your assignment. Oops, sorry guys. I'll get this